As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission. I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you're going. Better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains. Haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up. Fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah. Cause this is my road. Let's camera action.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHHLP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio.
Salutations, New Haven. Salutations, Connecticut. Salutations, the world. I've got a great guest for us today. So I've got a young and talented Black filmmaker on the rise, Christopher Brown, with us in the house, and we'll get to meet him. And there'll be an interesting twist. It seems that usually I'm doing the interviewing, but the filmmakers say, well, we want to do a little interview of you. So I don't know what that's going to be like, people. I'm a little nervous. I'm holding back. I don't know, but I'll do the best I can, Mr. Brown. So, Christopher, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and also your passions? So, Harry, I'm not hearing that on my end. Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Turner. And my name is Christopher Brown, as you mentioned, and I graduated from Trinity College, and I went on to study finance at Tuck School of Business, the Bridge program up in Dartmouth. And I found myself at NYU, where I was studying filmmaking under Spike Lee and Richard Wesley. My focus was screenwriting and dramatic writing. So I studied a lot with Richard Wesley. I studied with, so many powerful people. I mean, I should have written down a list of people I need to thank. But namely, Walter Bernstein was my mentor at the time. And, I just kind of got into the film industry from NYU.
Just before you share that passion, they do have some testimonials on YouTube. So I've heard Spike Lee talk about you. Others talk about you. So, and I'm going to tell you, Spike Lee doesn't talk about me over there at all. So and I haven't seen him anywhere on air talk about any other film directors or producers. So that's an incredible piece. So your passion, is your passion film? Is your passion writing? Tell us about it.
Well, yes, my passion is writing and filmmaking. I'm a writer director. So my passion is to tell stories that, I feel passionate about, things that move me and causes that are important to me. I try to grapple with those type of issues, social justice issues. Also, my last piece, Thoughts Are Things, was about the importance of libraries and the importance of small acts of kindness. I mean, I like to tell stories that I think will lead people in a good direction. Because oftentimes, when I was growing up consuming media, it was leading me in an opposite direction. So I wanted to take it back to the reading rainbows, take it back to, the roots and, some of the more powerful, constructive storytelling that kind of left a lasting legacy, not only on the individual who saw it, but the family he was a part of or she was a part of. I wanted to tell timeless pieces like that, like a do the right thing, if you will.
Do the right thing. Perfect. And you came to my attention from the community engagement office with Camilla Hastings, who knows I have a passion for dispelling a myth that Black fathers are absent.
Oh, wow.
I'm saying, I don't see this absence, and I don't, and it's got nothing to do with race, has to do with how poor I am, what my conditions are. But I see a lot of, I know too many Black fathers that are actively engaged, powerful, committed, and all that stuff over there. So that's why she connected you to me. She said, Dr. Goodness always talking about, don't be giving me this deficit picture of our communities or struggle. It's sort of like the old Public Enemy song, Don't Believe the Hype. I'm like, don't believe the hype. Black fathers are not absent. A whole thing and across the way. But let me ask you, how did you decide you wanted to be a filmmaker? If I hear you were at Trinity, then you did some finance, then you were at Dartmouth, and then you were in NYU making films. How?
Well, it's interesting. Well, film was always my passion. So it's funny because I found my passion when I became a father. Interesting enough, my daughter, my oldest daughter, Carter, was born on the day that a good friend of mine was being buried. So I attended, I became a dad on the same day that I was a pallbearer in a funeral. The same week that I was also attended another funeral for a good friend of mine who was a scholar. And unfortunately, during the time in Hartford, the North End especially, I mean, the entire city was just bloodshed. I mean, it was just people were, turning to pistols to, resolve conflicts. And it was just happening far too frequent and often among my peers. I lost about, I don't know, 17 or 18 friends the year that Carter was born. And it drove me to my knees, really. I had to pray for my purpose. And I found it when a gentleman walked by my house with a stack of DVDs in a plastic bag that I offered to purchase from him. And when I got upstairs, I found that it was a stack of DVDs from the Hartford Public Library. And before I got through that stack of DVDs, I had already found my purpose, which was to tell stories and be a storyteller. And to go full circle, 20 some odd years later, I'm producing this film for the Hartford Public Library. And both of my daughters perform in the film. So my daughter that I was learning to change her diapers happens to be the college student in Thoughts Are Things that's looking for the science books. So that's just really interesting, I feel, for me anyway.
And people will make sure that we throw in the link for that video over there for you. But the film that really I just fell in love with is this Thoughts Are Things, and it's really this beautiful story. And I didn't realize both your daughters were in it. When we talked the
Yeah,
other day, you mentioned one. You even mentioned you made a cameo in it. I mean, it is an incredible film about the love of libraries, about the power of librarians, and it also I showed it to my teachers last night. If you don't mind, Chris, I had a
that's
class
fine. That's fine.
teachers, and they were enthralled. It was perfect because they're the teachers who are going to deliver some free tutoring services. And I said,
Mm,
you never know, because in the film, there's a young boy that the librarian helps out when he's a little bit in trouble. As young, not too much, but just a little. And then that young boy winds up saving his life in the end. So it's a powerful story. I love the
thank you.
story. Where did it come from?
Well, I've seen a lot of films, and I was that little boy at one point in time. I was the one that needed guidance. I was the one that was kind of like on the wrong side of the fence, if you will. And there were gentlemen in my community, a librarian named Anwar from the Hartford Public Library. Then I had a friend named Michael Patterson that worked downtown. And then I had a mentor, Ralph Knighton, who was also from the city of Hartford. And they were feeding me books. They were giving me books. In fact, it was my friend Mike who gave me that book, As a Man Thinketh, which I carried with me to this day. And it was books like that, literature like that kind of exposed me to the power of my mind and how limitless life became when I became a reader. Like, it was just like, I'd found myself. I'd found it's something you said the other day to me, that books were either mirrors, windows, or sliding doors. And I found that to be true when I became a reader. It just opened up a whole new world of possibility to me in terms of opportunity. And that's how I ended up at Trinity, and so on and so forth. So I hope that answered your question.
No, that answers the question. And that idea that when we look at books as mirrors, we see ourselves in them. When we look at windows, we look into other people's lives, we get to know them. And those sliding doors are those ones where you step into. Ernest Gaines has this great book about a teacher and a prison. I don't want to get too much because I'll distract us, but it's one of those books you step inside,
Mm,
come that person, you see it, and those are transformational books. That's what I say. With the
absolutely.
librarian, these books at the library, and we probably share some things in common. Um, So I'm the last white boy in the neighborhood in my community after the 68 riots and stuff. Everybody who could afford that was light skinned like me, they ran out of the community. I stayed and I had the best of friends and the best of and welcoming places. But also, I was a homeless kid. So we'll get to that. Maybe we'll talk about the little library. But the library was a place I could be warm and
Mm.
I could see books about myself and the things I was going through. I could see others, so and that transformation was, I could see where I wanted to be. So yeah, the library was a perfect place, and I have to say that there's when you said how many people passed away living in the North End after I finished my PhD, I was coming back to New Jersey. So I'm from New Jersey, and the fellows were like, "Hey, yeah, let's get together." And I said, "Whoa, all right, let's do that." And there were 25 of us who were champion football players on the team, but most of us were dead or suffering the long-term incarceration
Mm.
because it's just a way of poverty. But books and libraries saved me, so I'm sure we're going to do that. Tell me
Mm.
about what are some of your other projects? Oh, wait! You had other films too. Come on, you got
Yeah,
to.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, you're not a one-shot wonder.
No, no,
Not
no,
like,
no.
oh, what, some of those one-hit songs we have of the 70s or the 60s and stuff. No, you're like the Supremes. You got an itinerary of hits. Tell us,
Thank
just name
you.
a couple more for us.
Well, my first short film was Nani. That was the first. That was my first, credit as a writer director. And then I've made some other films that have made some noise and some splashes. I wrote a commercial that I'm not sure how often they air it, but I shot that in Grand Rapids, Michigan, for a friend of mine who owned a chain of drug rehabilitation programs, and he's someone that I met at Sundance. I crewed on a number of films also, either through Spike Lee when I was working with Spike Lee on a film called The Sweet Blood of Jesus. I met a gentleman by the name of Nate Parker. Him and Spike had just finished. They'd wrapped the film, and I was also a part of that film, but I was an office PA on this film. I can't the title of it.
Oh, come back to you. Don't
It'll
worry.
come back to me. But at the time, this gentleman Nate Parker was writing a script about the Nat Turner Rebellion, and that film would become The Birth of a Nation. And I worked as an assistant to Nate on that, and I was a walkie PA. And it was there that I realized that I needed to move to Los Angeles. Like there was that I was experiencing what many describe as a glass ceiling in New York, and that the real opportunities for filmmaking and becoming a director was in California. But my first attempt at telling a story, I went back to the old neighborhood, and I started to deal with some of the trauma that I experienced growing up. And lo and behold, I was able to rewrite the narrative in that community, and what could have easily been conceived as enemy lines. That it was dispelled when I made this film. So it was amazing that I was able to go and rewrite a tragic story in a way that provided understanding for both sides, for two sides. And it brought peace, at least in my life, in my journey. So I think it's an example. Nani is an example where art not only mimics life, but it can also create a new life for someone in a way that changes them for the positive.
Perfect. So now when we mentioned Nat Turner, so we got to
Mhm.
make sure not everybody. If we think about this day, where you got a governor in Florida saying we won't study, I can't have an honest Black history course in my
Mhm.
state. We have a candidate running for president who said America's never been racist.
Mhm.
In that sense, and we have book bannings all across the country. So when we talk
Yeah.
about Nat Turner, we're talking about a, 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 a slave rebellion,
Yes, we are.
and in terms probably one of and it's a piece of history that people need to know. People need to know that every day that African slaves who arrived on our shores, were born on our shores, were always struggling, always fighting for freedom, always looking for a way up. And so, I think that's that stuff. When for me, that's a mirror, but that
Mhm.
mirror builds respect for
It does.
for
An
Black history,
appreciation.
which is American history over there. And
Absolutely.
then
Absolutely.
real one quick point, Birth of a Nation, we had two Birth of a Nations there.
We did.
Uh,
We did.
and the first one, I don't think you would like or I would like. The Birth of a Nation was the rallying cry for a 30 million plus American Ku Klux Klan.
Absolutely.
So
It
tell us,
actually
just
reinvigorated. It actually reinvigorated the Klan. So
reinvigorated, and we
yeah,
certainly don't need any reinvigorating of the of a violent group like the Klan. That's our first, uh, you know, Black Eyed Peas have sing. You know, we got domestic terrorists right here living in the USA, and the Klan are definitely domestic terrorists. So the pieces that when I'm thinking about this, being a filmmaker, a screenwriter, we can write history factually, and we can rewrite the narrative that builds of the. So this is just fascinating and stuff. And I'm thinking, oh my God, if I was only 40 years younger, I might be joining you. I might be saying, Spike, can I catch your coffee for you? You know, can I hold the mic over there? That kind of sense. But now
That's-
we know that you're a filmmaker, but you also have other projects and things in development. So could you tell us a little bit of what else are you doing? Are you just out there every day filming people, recording sounds? What are you doing?
well, I do have a feature in development. It's a big deal. I'm extremely excited about it, but because it's in development, I can't speak much about it.
Okay.
Um, but I do have also I produce for the Hartford Public Library, and we're coming up on our 250th anniversary of service to the Hartford community. In our archives, some of the material in the archives are older than 250 years. So it has been my goal to work with our audio production manager, Sam Sigmund. He and we've been floating around town and gathering, collecting all the many library stories that we can. So we have this a focus on audio right now, and we've been getting all the library stories of our local legends, and that's just been an eye opener in itself. I got a chance to sit down with Lou Brown. He was once the news personality when I was growing up. We both lived on Grafton Street on the south end of Hartford. A lot of people know me on the north end, but they don't realize I'm originally from the south end. And Lou Brown was my first image of a celebrity. You know, I used to think he was famous because he was on TV all the time.
He was
He
famous.
is, and he is, and he is. But at the time, I didn't understand the difference between local politics and national politics. But still, you know, Lou is a shining figure in my life, and he still, to this day, acts as a mentor, continues to encourage me and invite me to things. In fact, I was just at Trinity for something they were honoring Lou about 2 or 3 weeks ago. I was there. So I thank God for Lou, and I thank God for him being in my peripheral as a child, because I think that in and of itself kind of was
And it's
he
people in
was
our
acting.
lives that show
Yeah,
up,
he was acting
angels
as
in the in the wings that kind of
absolutely,
inspire and
absolutely.
lift and keep us from straying from what really matters and gives us hope and future. So I often I'll begin with my classes. My teachers all know the story of
Mm.
the homeless kid who we didn't have free and reduced lunches in school. I'm too old for that. And so if you didn't have lunch, you brought your lunch to school. If you didn't have it, you didn't eat. And I
Yeah,
remember that was my seventh grade class with Mr. Bass. He's my hero. Mr. Bass turns around and Mr. Bass knows that, oh, Jesse's not eating anything. And you know, you're a little kid. You say, I don't like
yeah,
to eat. Nah, I hate lunch. It's the worst meal of the day. You know, all the kids be looking at me, yeah, and I'll be looking at them eating their bologna sandwiches, their liverwurst sandwiches, their peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I'm
yeah, yeah.
starving as can be. I haven't eaten anything, and I have no
Wow.
place to sleep that night. I'll be sleeping with my mother in a train station. This kind of crazy stuff in your life. But Mr. Bass, what he did was he noticed that. And the
Mhm.
next thing I knew was for a year, he fed me lunch. And he did it this way by saying, oh, look, 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 look. My wife made me 2 sandwiches today. I can't believe it. I don't like liverwurst, and I have 2 of them. Who's gonna eat it? He knew I love liverwurst,
Yeah.
and he says to me, Jesse, could you eat this one for me? Now, let me tell you, if there's ever been honey from the gods, that
Mm,
sandwich was honey from the gods. And Mr. Bass changed my life. And I went from as a homeless kid, I was definitely for at least 2 years, we were in that predicament. And for those 2 years, I was probably the worst student you could have in class. From that
mm.
first sandwich on, I never knew anything but an A, never knew anything but respect. Teachers became my heroes instantly. So Mr. Bass is like that. And Amwar, the librarian, and Mr. Brown. And I love the public to know that I think that's what I saw when I watched that
Oh
Thoughts on.
wow.
I saw that an act of kindness, an
Yes,
act
it
of
was.
respect today can change your life tomorrow. So, and we're focused on schools and stuff, on test scores and all the wrong things. We should be
Mm,
focused on building respect and dignity and helping people along the way and giving them those acts of kindness to change that. But I want to bring back. I want to get back to. You said you work for the Harvard Public Libraries, and I think there's a project there. I think people can't see that
mm.
Samuel's next to you over there collecting some
Sam,
audio
Sam,
over there.
you want to
He
just say
can't
wait?
see. It's okay. Sam's the audio person, so we saw his hand. We saw his hand. We're good for that.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
what I'm saying is, they're collecting. If I remember, if I was looking up on because you're a research study in itself, and I
Mm,
was looking up, and there are audio workshops, how to do podcasts coming up,
absolutely. Yeah,
video,
yeah.
all of that. So could you tell us about what's going on at the Harvard Public Library? What are you and Sam doing? Causing chaos?
Well, first I have to thank, Leticia Cotto, and my colleague Nigel White. It was us with Nigel who had first brought the idea of this Picpecia grant that we just got, and we wrote, and we applied to this grant, and we received something where what 91,000 that we received in October, and we spent all that. We spent 91,000 on mixers and field audio equipment, mostly audio equipment, because the train of thought was that if we could teach people in the community and give them access to professional audio equipment, a lot of the things that you see people filming with their cell phones, and DSLRs and cameras that are a lot easier to access, you could actually create content with that, and you'll have the sound. So if you remember Blair Witch Project and other
Yeah.
films like that nature, where the picture quality might not meet your everyday standards, but because you can hear it, a person will still be engaged. I think social media is an evidence of that too, because the picture quality on a lot of those posts are terrible, but because people can hear it, they'll still catch the joke, they'll still follow the story, and they'll still enjoy the content. So that was our thinking in going audio heavy, to kind of open the door to people to tell their own stories, and find their own narratives, and be a platform for themselves, if you will, and just have the professional audio equipment and access to equipment and the technique, the skill set that they needed to use the equipment. So that is the first part of the grant. And like you just mentioned, we had our first audio class that ran from November through December. And we learned a lot from that. But we do have 2 more courses, 2 more workshops coming up in the spring. The first being a podcasting workshop, and the second being in a digital filmmaking workshop. So we're looking forward to, opening the door for the community to come in and create, and find other creatives that they can work with and crew with, to realize their visions.
I'm in. I think I might be taking those workshops over there. In
That's awesome.
terms of, like, people may not realize, normally before COVID, we were doing this radio show in the studio. The
Mhm.
studio, everything is perfect. The sound is perfect. The visuals are perfect. It just flows together. What we're used to doing on phones, one benefit is we have a million pictures of our babies and things in our lives, but the quality of of that visual is not really uh, film worthy quality. It's acceptable. The audio seems fine, but it's not always good. Sort of like on my TV, my smart TV, I have the sound bar so I can hear the audio in the back as well, and that kind of stuff. So I love this idea, and if people can make podcasts, this is the stuff. When kids used to ask me, I taught writing on the Tohoto O'odham Reservation. That's in Arizona, and so those are all native students, and so we used to have some classic conversations. Say, why should you, what's writing? They would say, well, it's boring, kind of tiring. And then I say, well, you're going to trust white people to write your story? And they're like,
Mhm.
no. And I'm saying, then you need to start writing a story. Podcasting gives us the same things. Imagine if we had podcasts, our grandmas, our relatives, our uncles and our aunts, all those people that are no longer in our lives. And the same thing with the filmmaking. And it's interesting. I don't know if the local TVs, like Nutmeg is in New Britain,
Mhm.
it will also lend you equipment. They won't train you to do it. They
Yeah,
will
so
lend you equipment.
I mean, you raise an important point because the success of HBO Studios relies heavily on the partnerships, and one of the main partnerships that we are developing now is with HPA TV. That's Hartford Public Access Television, and their model, their business model, is to provide community members with the equipment to tell stories and produce content in the Hartford region, and that's kind of where that marriage between HPA TV and HBO Studios will provide, access to the community, to community members, to get the cameras and everything that they need to go out and tell stories, be it a web series, a podcast. The whole idea is to eliminate the digital divide that exists in poor communities like Hartford. And so I'm just happy to be a part of it. I mean, I recall a time when I would have to get on a train or the bus, or drive down to Manhattan to get access to the digital media library there. And now that I'm in LA most of the time, I'm oftentimes at USC at the Cecil B. DeMille Film Library. But all those resources will soon be readily available to anyone in the Hartford community downtown. That's a part of the digital media initiative that we have, building HPL Studios. There will be books and workshops and educational series and books that you only get access to in film school will be right down at our public library. So
Right?
I'm super excited about this project.
Public library. And while we're talking about libraries for a minute,
Mhm.
the other day we were having a discussion about libraries. So see my little history of
Yeah.
libraries books, and Christopher and I were talking about. We seem to have a love of libraries and a love of literacy and all that stuff. But I was telling Christopher about the early libraries, the great
Mm.
the Library of Alexandria, where there were
Mhm.
over 250,000 scrolls and texts.
Mm.
It was the largest library in the world. No European library came close to it. They were talking about 100 if they were lucky. And we're talking
Wow.
about 250. Same thing
Wow.
in Baghdad, in Persia. Same thing. We had
Right.
libraries all over the world that were things. But one thing that I did, I mentioned to Chris, was libraries in the old days used to be noisy. And so
Mm. They
look
were
at,
like communal
right,
communal places. It's more
communal
like James
places.
Well.
So we would have this conversation, but also the reading of text. So when we're talking, because we're talking about the history of reading, and I'm not certain the public will understand this, but let me explain it to you. The first written text, whether they were dots, whether they were in some kind of script with the hieroglyphics, they had no spaces, no punctuation. The lines just went on to the next and the next and the next. So when we're doing that, the way to be sure that you were conveying the text, and back then, the purpose of a text was to give you a conversation that somebody wrote down before, and the idea was you had to reproduce it in as accurate as possible. So you read them orally. So Chris and I
Mm.
might be reading the same text from Spike Lee, a letter from Spike Lee, say, "Well, I want this, and I think you should do this with your next film." But when
Mm.
there's no punctuation, no spaces, there was a lot of oral reading, and the history of literacy is that for the first 3,000 years we all read orally, and we read out loud. And if you were to read silently, they thought that was heresy. They thought that was suspicious. They thought they couldn't trust you because you might not produce the text accurate. So I just thought this library, and then I just want to get back to the library as a social place. I think maybe we're coming full circle, because when we're at the Hartford Public Library, and I'm there for the podcasting, and I need to go there for the podcasting workshop, what happens is that's going to be noisy. That's going to be talking. It's going to be returning to the libraries that were great social centers where scholars, spiritual leaders, military generals, great smart people in general. Libraries were also private back then, because it's funny, the 250th anniversary coming up for the Hartford Public Library. I think the oldest one in Connecticut is in Salisbury, I think. And
Really?
both of the libraries, the Hartford and that library, are pre-America, pre the nation.
Absolutely.
We're
Absolutely.
we're talking about the library. And public libraries are a recent phenomenon that only they've came around in the 18th century. Before that, libraries were for the powerful, for the elite, for universities and those kinds of things. So
Well,
you're really bringing the library's equity.
well, the powers that be recognize, you have this huge influx of Eastern Europeans, blacks from the, former slaves from the South coming north. I mean, you had such a movement and an exodus of different places coming to America. And it was the only way that these people could pay taxes and participate in democracy is if they understood it. So the only way you can understand a system and kind of become a part of it is if you have access to literature and information. So I think it went hand in hand. I mean, it was in the elite's best interest to provide that access, because without it, there is no ladder to climb, So I'm really interested in everything that you're saying, and how public libraries came about, because access to information. I mean, think about it. I mean, people are, to this day, you have so much student debt that's associated with access to information, because they know once you have access to information, and they know once you acquire the knowledge, you can get gainful employment. I mean, it's just
You can get, it's not only gainful employment, it's you could become a better person. You could rise up in many different ways,
in many
and
different
in
ways.
that sense. But this library stuff, you had mentioned the narratives of slaves. Well, we have the Library of Congress has two sets of slave narratives. They are historical treasures. We have those that were written during Reconstruction, and so they were written just of dictation, exactly
Yes.
as I'm saying. And so some people are critical of them because they say, well, they're not so grammatically structured, or but they are as their primary sources, and in history, primary sources are gold. And then during the Great Depression, and once again we had to employ people. We had people imagine this. We paid people to go collect the narratives, the memories of surviving slaves. And so
Yes.
those two sets of narratives are in the Library of Congress. They are historical treasures, primary sources. Historians, they don't want to hear what Dr. Turner says about something. They want to go right to the source. That's the goal. That's sort of like me being able to say, well, I didn't see Michael Jordan on TV. I played against him. And by the way, I did not, but that's just normal. But that concept. So this idea that the library becoming a social place that allows people not only to read about the world, but to write the world as they see it. That's what I like about that. So that's amazing, that concept in there. And I can't believe that we're doing this. This is a time when urban libraries funding has been cut about 20% over the past decade. We're not cutting them in Rodale Drive. We're not cutting them in Simsbury and Avon. We're not making any cuts to those libraries, but others and stuff. So it's interesting. But we want to think about something. So you've got the celebration of the 250. Is there a specific day, or is the workshops part of that?
Well, there's a website. Let me see if I can
put it in the box.
There's definitely a website. Let me see. They were actually going over that yesterday. Sam, you remember that website that they were giving us for $250 yesterday?
250.
Hold on, I want to say it's 250 HPL. Let me find it.
Yeah, you're on there. You should be able to see it there too, and we'll find it. We'll find.
HPL250.org.
Yes, www.hpl250.org. I'm actually going to put that in a box.
Put it in the box. Put it in the box.
And you'll be able to follow the calendar and all the events that are associated with our anniversary. You know, it's amazing the power of a library system like Hartford Public Library. You know, I would never have thought that I'd be able to accomplish so much through the library. You know, how does a filmmaker become a librarian? You know, that you just kind of find your passion. I found my passion. I found my safe space in a library.
In the library.
And then when I became a Trinity College student, I started to work at Lathrop Library, and I found my passion in the media center, where professors would, curate films as teaching tools, you know, as instruments to expose to different cultures or different time periods. And, you know, I was able to, you know, study African film and French cinema and, German cinema and early Hollywood cinema. And, you know, I came across books like the Movie Director's Story, in which it created there was so many profiles of all these directors, but nobody was of color. Nobody was of color. It wasn't until there's one of my favorite books about directors is the Movie Director's Story, and it profiles about 100 directors. None of them are of African American descent. And it's not until you get to page 207 that you see an African American even pictured in the book. And it's when they're talking about Norman Jewison, and you have pictures of Sidney Poitier, who was in films. So, ironic enough, this was my favorite book because it provided a mirror to what I wanted to be, and also a window into how I might become it. But it became readily, it became obvious.
Becomes obvious.
The book that being a writer director was a privilege.
Was a privilege.
And I understood that, and I still understand that, and I'm humbled and I'm honored to have people to support me. And I do have some people that I want to thank, because I wouldn't be producing for the library had not it been for people like Anwar Ahmad, Spike Lee, who I reached out to when the opportunity first came about, Marie Jerry, Diane Lewis, and Bridget Quinn, the head librarian and CEO of Hartford Public Library. If it weren't for those individuals, I would not be as active on the front lines of bringing digital literacy to Hartford as I am. They've given me an opportunity to kind of bring back everything that I've learned in Hollywood, everything that I've learned in the industry, and create opportunities for young people, all people, to start to, investigate their own narratives and get their own family histories and oral histories and stories. And it's just an amazing opportunity, I feel, being able to, produce for the Hartford Public Library, because it's unbelievable, really.
It's let's give it the words. In a world that's racially torn, it's radical.
It's radical.
So people don't want to say that. It's transformational. That's what racists are afraid of. Black lives, brown lives, LGBTQ lives, poor immigrant lives, all of a sudden be able to read text freely, not be able to go, so when I bought, I think my library book probably cost me like $30-something or something, but I could get it publicly free at the library over there. That concept, now I could be writing my stories. That's why Maya Angelou said, history, despite its wrench and pain, need not be relived again if faced with courage. So when I'm thinking about that kind of concept, that's what the library has always offered us. It's the one place I could find equity. So I can walk into the Hartford Public Library, any public library. I don't say we could go back and we're not going to find ever no blacks allowed, no Hispanics allowed, no women allowed. People don't know the history of libraries. Children were not allowed in libraries for the longest time.
Yeah.
Women were not allowed in the library. So it's kind of definitely poor working people weren't allowed in the library. So there's radical transformation stuff. So,
Radical.
but I want to do a little transition because what will happen is time will go quickly. We're at like 11:44, probably another by 11:57. Harry will start playing the music on us. So you had some questions. You wanted to turn the interview around. Nobody's ever did that. You're like you're already radical transforming. No one's ever asked me questions.
Oh, that's awesome. That is awesome. Let's you want to mic him? Okay. So I'm going to start asking him his library story. Okay, awesome. What are your earliest memories of a library?
All right.
Of the library?
They're all good. And there's two stories I always share with my teachers. I teach teachers. That's what I do over here, and I share these stories. My earliest memory of the library is that when school was off, my mother worked, so she worked as a waitress. She worked all day long, sent me to school, and everybody worked in the house. And so when there was a school break, my mother used to call my grandfather and say, "You got to take care of the kid." And he'd be like, "I don't want to sit around this apartment over here." And he'd go to the library. And he was a big library person. So I tell people my memories of my grandfather in the library is really he used to throw me under the table. I'd go under the big old wooden tables, and it was the libraries when they had catalog times. But it was a bunch of old men that would hang out at the table. And what happened is the library, and especially in the days of my youth, the library had newspapers from all around the world. So who sat at that table? My grandfather was a World War I veteran of foreign war, was an immigrant. All immigrants from Africa, immigrants from Spain, immigrants from Mexico, immigrants from Asia, sat at that table and they would find their newspapers and they would talk and read. And my grandfather would just throw books at me. He had no idea he wasn't a teacher. He'd throw out, Cervantes' Don Quixote at the 8-year-old kid under the table. And I'd be like, "Well, this book is pretty hard, Grandpa." But I remember that. And so that idea that the library was a place, and his library was talkative. Now I'm sure the librarians every once in a while came in, maybe Sam's over there, and they'd go, "Shh." But the old men were talkative. They were battling about whatever was going on in the world. They were fighting and what was going on in South America, Europe, Africa. They had lively discussions, and they'd be bouncing to the newspapers like, look, it says right over here and stuff. So that was that, and that's one memory. But the other piece of the library for me is when you grow up in a community, and my community would be that community. As a young kid, we're talking about people coming back from the Vietnam War, our veterans, lots of people dying, coming back with being addicted to cheap heroin that was there. Drugs were flooding our communities. Violence was all over the place. I mean, maybe it's like I'm trying to think I think Dickens said the best of times, the worst of times. These are the times we have. But what I remember is that there was an eviction notice on the apartment, and my father disappeared for us for about 15 years. And my mother and I wound up homeless. And so the deal was that we would sleep at the local train station. Everything we'd have would be on us. And she liked one train station, the Erie Lackawanna train station in Hoboken. So we lived in Jersey City to go to Hoboken, not that far away, but it had great bathrooms and little showers. These you don't have these anymore. But what happened, we'd go there and we'd stay there and we'd struggle. And the idea would be, could we afford a little room or could we eat? And, but really what happened is my mother worked, and people forget about that, homelessness, people. But what I remember about the library, my mother's friend, Gloria, worked at the library. My mother would say, after school, you don't want you going on the street. I want you running around. You go to school. And when you leave school, you go to the library. And when I went to the library, uh, Mrs. S would make sure that she welcomed me with a smile. She knew my mother. I would stay there until my mother got off work and come pick me up. And Mrs. S would make sure that I had a hot chocolate. People didn't give no hot chocolates to people coming to the library. I had a
Mm.
hot chocolate. I would have these great homemade cookies he would make for me. And she'd always have books for me. Books, and she knew my circumstances. Um, she was my mother's high school friend, chum, and so that idea, that librarian there, it was more than just the books. The library was the place where I found my humanity. That's what it is. So that's my real library story, is that a librarian gave me the humanity that enabled me to deal with the two most difficult years of my life. I was
Mm.
safe, I was warm, I was welcome, and I was fed not only the cookies, but my mind was fed. I had the best books, you know.
Listen,
Yeah,
that
it
sounds
was good.
that sounds a lot like a movie
Yeah,
I've
that
seen.
might be a movie,
That
but
sounds a lot like Thoughts Are Things.
yeah,
That's
yeah, it's like that. It's like that. What That's why when Camilla Hastings said, uh, Dr. Turner, you might like to meet this guy. She's over
yeah,
there,
that's
and she sent
awesome.
me the link, and the link was she had the link like it was the biggest link I ever saw, but it worked when I clicked on it. So
Yeah, that's awesome.
normally I said, Camilla, you could get a shorter version of that link, but in any event, I remember watching that, and it brought back the fresh memories. The
Mm,
number one predictor of how students, we're always worried about standardized test scores.
mm.
We're always worried about how schools are failing us, but the schools are not our number one predictor of how successful students will be with literacy. Uh, Test scores are certainly not the number one predictor. Even the SAT tells you they're not a good predictor. You should look at GPAs. But the best predictor of being successful on standardized tests is access to books. And
Wow.
so Jeff McQuillan, Dr. McQuillan from UCLA, and Stephen Krashen. Dr. Krashen is the number one language acquisition researcher in the world. And both of them have written research and written books that talk about the best predictor of your academic performance is
Yes.
classroom libraries, is access to libraries, books in the home. Access to books are the number one predictor. And for poor kids like me, we didn't have, the only book my family owned was a Bible.
Mm.
And we were Catholics, so we don't really read the Bible a lot. We didn't read the Bible a lot. The priest kind of did it in the homily. But what happens is libraries provide that. So it's definitely, if I wanted to change things, I should be over there making libraries the number one priority of helping students become successful. They should be
Abs-
our temples. That's the stuff. So I
Absolutely.
don't know if that makes sense, but
No, it makes perfect sense. It makes What made you? Where did you find your passion for literacy?
well, it's the old story. I'm the kid that, so people. I don't want people to know too much about me, but you might call me also the trouble bully in the neighborhood as well, with all the little gang boys, football players, and stuff like that. I was good in school, but other things. And I always, because of that experience with my grandfather in the library, I
Mm.
started reading books. I'm an urban kid. They didn't give us a real novel until we were in the ninth grade. That's the first time I saw a book that had chapters in it.
Oh wow.
But what happened is, because of that experience as a young kid, I always knew the libraries, Charles Dickens, whatever it was, my grandfather was feeding me books that he thought I should be reading over
Mm.
there. And so I fell in love with reading because I wasn't a kid that went on vacation. I don't know what, everybody goes somewhere for 2 weeks. Everybody goes to Europe, Disneyland, all those things. While my daughter has seen all those things, I never saw those things. So
Mm.
books were my vacations, books were my dreams, were my hopes. Most of the male figures in my life were not positive. Uh, Most of the community was just like you were talking about the North End. I mean, I remember going to school one day and there were two mafia hits on two men. We're at a traffic light and there's two dead bodies in a car, all that kind of stuff. So it wasn't unusual to see violence. So books took me there. So I struggled with it. When an old man gives you Don Quixote, that's 800 pages, until you start reading it. And then when you're reading it with him, said, that's not right. Read it again. I felt like the old readers, the old monks who had to read
Yeah.
continue. But books gave me, they were my ticket to my dreams. And who wants to be, I don't know. Today, I'm living my dream life over there. And as my teaching, of course, time will go. But because when I came back after I did my PhD and I wanted to see all my friends, there were 45 of us on our football team. We won our little championship, and in high school, that's a big thing, we're just a bunch of ghetto kids and playing against the wealthier schools, the better schools. Somehow we won. I don't know how, but we won. And when I came back, I wanted to see all 45, but there was only 15 of us that were not incarcerated. And so that reunion, so many, half of that 25 were dead by homicide or suicide, and the other half was serving lifetime incarceration sentence. I have one that had 8 lifetimes, sentenced 8 times because he had committed arson that killed 8 people. So it's this kind of stuff. So in that sense, so books, and if I look at the difference, my role as a teacher, when I decided what was my mission, I was going all of those kids I knew I grew up with. And trust me, when they were little kids, they were good kids. They were good kids. We played fair. We were nice. We were the best of good athletes, good citizens, good all that. And I don't know what happens as we grow up. I think books and libraries saved me over there. But my purpose of a teacher is I want to once have that class where everybody lives and everybody gets the dream. And maybe that's the idea with your filmmaking, but we got to get back to you. Tell us, you're coming down to the last 2 minutes. Give us the thoughts that you want to leave us with. Tell us, I know we got the podcasting, we got the filmmaking, but and you got grants, we've got that piece, but what's the dream? What's the dream? That passionate dream. I said that I want to have the class where everyone lives, everyone prospers. What's your dream with filmmaking?
My dream is to create a studio and to have a studio in the Northeast, in New England, very similar to Tyler Perry Studios, if you will. And I want to create a partnership between Trinity College, which was a life-saving lifeline for me, and in Hartford Public Library, which was also a lifeline for me, and create access in a way that, because one thing we had at Trinity, we had a film studies minor, but we didn't have a department. And I would love to create an opportunity that for Trinity students to study film in a department. So if I could my dream is to buy land, and on that land create a talent factory that serves as an incubation space for those who want to study the arts, and for community members who are interested in the arts to be exposed to that training, if you will. And I want to do this with an emphasis on storytelling. I remember we used to go to this camp, the YMCA in New Hartford. There was I can't remember what, Camp Jewel, I believe, for different workshops. My vision would be to have a situation out in a remote location full of trees in the wilderness where people are taught storytelling techniques that matter, and they're able to then facilitate the production of that story and begin to work with other artists like costume designers, my mentor Ruth Carter, casting directors like my mentor Kim Coleman, and just find the different ways.
All right, we're coming to an end. Of course, an hour wasn't enough. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to that studio.
As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm
Thank
never
you,
quitting
thank you,
on my
thank
mission.
you.
I'm on roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing.
Yeah,
Better
I
watch
gotta
the way
learn
you
how to
going.
edit.
Better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains. Haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up, give up. Fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah. Cause this is my road. Let's camera action.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHHLP 103.5 SM. Your home.